Hello and welcome to Kettle and Bones, where we make really delicious, really healthy food. And you can too. Well, everybody, this is the big one. This is the greatest episode of Kettle and Bones to date. A bold claim, I know, but it's true. And it's partly owing to the fact that today we are making one of the greatest foods that humankind has ever produced. Millennia of hunting, gathering, farming and agriculture, and painstaking gastronomic research and experimentation all culminate today in this historic moment. Because, as we always do, we're making it fresh, healthy, and low carb. We're making crispy, thin crust pizza. Let's get cooking. Oh boy. So excited. Oh, okay, all right, let's get started. Mixing bowl. Okay. If you have any previous experience with keto pizza, you will be pleased to know that this is not going to be a cauliflower crust pizza. This crust is legitimately bready and crunchy, and it starts with equal parts almond flour and oat fiber. Now this is, wow, this is just the fibrous part of the oats. The third thing we're adding is 2 parts vital wheat gluten. Oh, what? Wheat? What do you mean wheat? How can we be making low-carb pizza if we add wheat to it? Well, this is actually just wheat gluten, not wheat flour. Just the gluten, that's going to give this a nice bready structure without adding very many carbs at all. No, seriously, let's check the label. There you go. See, there's only... Holy moly, look at all that protein! 23 grams for a quarter cup and only 4 grams of carbohydrates. That absolutely works. In goes the vital wheat gluten. Now, if you're gluten intolerant, this obviously won't work for you, and in future episodes we'll explore some other options for getting some delicious pizza flavors into your regular rotation. Moving on, we're going to add a little Xanthan Gum. This is going to add some additional structure to our crust, and it's going to be a big help if you're ever playing Scrabble and you need to play an X. And now we'll add just a little seasoning. Conventional pizza dough would have sugar in it. We're going to use erythritol sweetener. Just a bit. And a moderate sprinkling of salt. If you want to get fancy with the flavors of your crust, you could add onion powder, garlic powder, dried herbs, even tomato paste if you want a specific flavor. Today, however, I'm just going to go traditional. Let's give our dry ingredients a quick cursory mixing. And now, it's time to get wet. That is, wet ingredients. It's time to prepare our liquid ingredients. We're starting with warm water. This is probably about 3 cups or so. Warm, not hot. You should be able to comfortably dip your finger in it. Into that warm water, we're going to dissolve some honey. Give that a quick stir as well. Don't worry, this honey isn't actually for you to eat. It's for our next ingredient, yeast. These little guys are going to munch on this honey, and that's going to make them gassy. And the gas they produce is going to give our finished crust the soft, spongy interior that's characteristic of the breads that we know and love. Look at them go. They're getting the honey. After about 4 or 5 minutes, you'll probably start to see bubbles forming. The yeast are loving that honey water. You'll also start to smell the telltale yeasty aroma that precedes the baking of fresh bread. Let's give that mixture a gentle stir. And now we're going to add in 2 beaten eggs and a generous drizzle of olive oil. Give that another quick stir. And now it is time to combine our wet and dry ingredients. We're going to pour the wet into the dry and just fold them together. We're going for a tacky, shaggy dough here, and don't worry if it doesn't look like everything is completely mixed homogeneously. We're going to address that momentarily. If it's too wet or too dry, you can mix together proportional amounts of the appropriate ingredients. 1 part each of oat fiber and almond flour and 2 parts of vital wheat gluten if the dough is too wet. If it's too dry, I recommend just slowly streaming in a little additional warm water until it's close to where you want it, and then just add a splash of olive oil to that. However, not to toot my own horn too loudly, but today I nailed the proportions pretty much exactly. Here's what it will look like when it's sufficiently mixed. Still very clumpy, but all of the wet ingredients have been absorbed by the dry. We are now going to knead the dough. It's pretty sticky, so I'm dusting my kneading surface with a mixture that is equal parts almond flour and vital wheat gluten. I'm going to turn the dough out onto the countertop and let's get started. I won't lie to you, you're going to be kneading for a bit, probably 10 to 12 minutes, honestly. You could use a stand mixer with a dough hook attached to do this, but what fun would that be? All joking aside, I do like to interact with the food I'm making. I like to get my hands in it. I'm keeping the dough ball and countertop well dusted with my dry mixture to prevent sticking. My preferred kneading method is the old plop, pull, and fold technique. There's the plop, the pull, and the fold, pushing the dough forward to fold over on itself. The reason we're kneading this dough at all is to develop the gluten. When we combined our wet and dry ingredients, the gluten began to expand and form strands. By kneading this dough, we're warming the strands up and we're stretching them, and that actually makes the gluten strands stronger. We need them to be stronger so that as the yeast continue to produce gas from all that honey they ate, the gluten structure is strong and elastic enough to hold together as the dough fills with gas and rises. If we didn't need this to strengthen the gluten structure, it wouldn't be strong enough to rise and expand, and it would collapse into a very dense dough, something closer to a cracker or flatbread. I've been kneading this for about 10 minutes now, and it's still just a little tacky, but it doesn't stick to my hands or the countertop, so the wet to dry ratio is now just right. I'm going to transfer the dough ball into a bowl, and I'm going to cover it with a warm, damp towel. This is going in a warm place. I'm putting mine next to the oven, which is a pretty warm area of the kitchen, where it's going to rise for a bit. It needs to rise for a minimum of, I'd say, 2 hours. Pizza dough that is destined for a thin crust doesn't necessarily need to rise quite as long as if I was making a medium crust or a pan pizza. If I was making those, I would let the dough rise for up to 24 hours first. Maybe that's for another time. Let's do some quick cleanup. And while our dough is rising, let's make a quick, easy, raw pizza sauce. It begins, as all great pizza sauces do, with a can of whole San Marzano tomatoes. I'm just gently crushing these by hand. I don't want huge chunks of tomato in my sauce, obviously, but I want a lightly chunky, kind of rustic sauce, so I'm not going to puree this or use a hand mixer on it. Let's add some olive oil, some salt to your taste, and freshly ground black pepper. I'm also adding some red pepper flakes. I'm roughing this up in my hand a bit to release some of the oils and flavors. Let's also add some dried oregano. This is a very New York style seasoning to add to a sauce. And I'm going to add some coarsely torn leaves of basil. Again, kind of roughing these up with your hands releases some great additional flavors. This would be a great, simple pizza sauce as is, but personally, for my taste, it is missing just one thing: fresh garlic. A few medium cloves right in the garlic press. Not too much, just a nice garlicky kick. Our dough still needs some time, so let's strategize a bit with regards to toppings, shall we? I have always been a big fan of pretty much any pizza place's Supreme or Deluxe or The Works pizza with everything on it, so I'm going to do one with a nice variety of classic meats and veggies. We have uncured salami, sweet Italian pork sausage, and prosciutto ham slices, and some beautiful sweet mini bell peppers, red onion, black olives, and cremini mushrooms. These are some of my absolute favorite flavor combinations on pizza. For our second pizza, I want to do a slightly less complex combination. This is sweet Italian chicken sausage. I have sliced this the long way and grilled it in the pan on medium-high heat. I had sausage this way on a pizza in a Brooklyn-style pizzeria once, and it's genius. Your sausage doesn't accidentally roll off your slice. I'm going to pair the sausage with the crunch and slight sweetness of some more mini bell pepper slices. These will be great against the acidity of the sauce, the saltiness of the cheeses, and of course the crispy crunch of the thin crust. I do also have a great idea for a third pizza, but That could be a fun surprise for later. Finally, I'm going to finish all of my pizzas today with the herby freshness of, well, fresh herbs. Hand-torn leaves of fresh basil and parsley. It's now been about 2 hours, so let's check in on our little dough baby. Shh. Oh, so precious. Okay, this has expanded a bit. It also feels noticeably softer to the touch, indicating that the gluten has relaxed some. Once again, I'm dusting my work surface so things don't stick. And now I'm going to divide my dough into individual pizza portions. Since I know I'll be rolling these fairly thin, I think I can get about 6 portions from this. Today I'm making 3 different flavored pizzas, so the other half of the dough can go into some nice tight plastic wrap and keep in the fridge for a few days. I'll put the 2 dough portions I'm not using to the side and cover them with a damp towel to prevent them from drying out. And now, let's roll out our first crust. I'm getting this as circular as I can get it at first, and then I roll, dusting periodically with our dry ingredient mixture. This dough feels pretty elastic, I'd say even more than regular pizza dough, probably because of the oat fiber. Much more fiber in here than in any white flour pizza dough, I'm sure. There's one technique in particular that will help to speed this process along. Have you noticed that as I roll it out, it really wants to spring back and contract back to its previous size? Well, the dough is just tacky enough still that it sticks ever so slightly to the work surface. I'm going to actually let it be stuck for a few minutes to help it stretch out to the size I want. If I wait a bit before unsticking it, it won't shrink back quite so much. This is going on a lightly dusted pizza peel or cutting board or whatever you have handy. If it passes the jiggle test, you know it's not sticking to the surface and it's ready to go in the oven to pre-bake at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 204 degrees Celsius, for just about 10 minutes. In my oven, I have a very well-seasoned pizza stone that is now nice and hot. This will help, come on back now. This will help the crust cook on the bottom as well and aid in the development of a nice crispy crust. If you don't have a pizza stone, cast iron works really well for pizza. If you don't have a big flat piece of cast iron, you can flip an aluminum baking sheet upside down and cook on that. While our first crust is pre-baking, let's roll out our second one. Same as before. Let's allow this to just be stuck for a few minutes so that it will hold its shape, and let's peek in on crust number 1. Careful, careful, that's hot. Looks pretty good. It's not crispy yet, but it's no longer sticky on the outside, and you can tell it's risen a little bit from where it was when we rolled it out. That's what we want. Ultimately, we want to have a nice crispy crust outside that has just a thin, soft bready layer inside. The oven is now clear to receive crust number 2. Bullseye. Let's get a closer look at our first crust. We took this out of the oven right on time. The edges have just a tiny amount of browning happening. That's perfect. If we let this go too much longer and we had a deep golden brown on the crust now, when we cook it the second time with all the toppings on it, there's a good chance we would have either had to choose between undercooked toppings or a burnt crust. So don't let these get too toasty during the pre-bake. Just about 10 to 12 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 204 degrees Celsius should do it. Crust number 2 is looking good as well. Yeah, see? Just a little browning on the very edge for now. That's all we want. I went ahead and put the third crust in the oven to pre-bake. While that's happening, let's assemble our supreme pizza on crust number 1. We'll start with sauce. If you're putting sauce right onto the crust like we are, you want to make sure that you don't over-sauce it to the point of being too wet. You can soak the crust with too many wet ingredients and then it won't get crispy at all. Just a thin layer will do. Next, we're adding a base layer of low-moisture mozzarella cheese to glue everything down. Then let's add our meats: prosciutto ham, Italian sausage, and salami. I like a nice even distribution for this kind of pizza. The perfect bite, in my view, contains every one of our meats. Next, I'll add our veggies, our onions, bell peppers, olives, and I'm going to add another layer of mozzarella now, both for flavor and texture, and to keep our toppings from leaping off of your pizza slice. These little balls of Italian sausage are notorious for that if they're not held in place. Our final topping on this pizza will be the one that contains the most moisture, the mushrooms. I want these on top so that some of the water they contain will steam off. I wouldn't want these on the bottom layer of our toppings because arranging high moisture ingredients toward the bottom of the pile tends to result in a soggier crust. And in goes our first pizza. We're still at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 204 degrees Celsius, and this should only take about another 10 to 12 minutes. I'm going to keep a watchful eye on this though. Let's have pizza number 2 ready to go as soon as the oven becomes available. Let's start with sauce, low moisture mozzarella, our sliced chicken sausage, and we're going to glue this down using fresh mozzarella. Fresh mozzarella does contain more moisture, and some of that will be released as this bakes. But we have fewer toppings on this pizza, so I don't think things will get too wet. And last but not least, our bell peppers. We're coming up on just about 11 minutes since our first pizza went in, so let's check the oven. Look at that crust. That's the golden, toasty brown we were waiting for. The cheese is all melted and the toppings are cooked. This is ready. And in goes our Italian chicken sausage pizza. Okay, so I've teased our mysterious third pizza a little bit already. Let's put that together. This is a favorite around my house. It's probably not going to be for everyone, but my family loves it. It's a seafood medley pizza. I don't know if you can tell, I let this crust go a little longer on the pre-bake. It's a little more golden brown around the edges than our others. That's because this one won't be spending quite as much time in the oven as the others. It won't need to. This will be what's known as a white pizza, so we won't be using our tomato sauce, but we will be using our quick and easy roasted garlic from just a couple episodes ago, remember? This goes on like a paste, so I can easily spread this with the back of a spoon. We need 4 cloves to cover this relatively small-sized crust. Next, we're shredding on some low-moisture mozzarella and some finely grated Parmigiano Reggiano. Now let's drizzle on some olive oil. Not too much, I don't want this turning into an oily mess, just a little light lubrication. Now, because this is a seafood pizza, I'm going to add several anchovy fillets for a salty, nutty burst of flavor. If you don't care for anchovies, don't add them. Easy. Kind of looks like a sand dollar. Next, using a microplane, I am grating the zest of about 1/3 of this lemon. Lemon, garlic, and seafood. That's a no-brainer. And now, as before, some pieces of fresh mozzarella cheese. And this is going into the oven as is. I know what you're thinking. Anchovies and cheese isn't a seafood medley. It's barely a seafood jingle. Well, hold your seahorses there, Chief, because we're not done. While this cooks in the oven, we're going to prep the rest of the seafood right now. Over medium-high heat, we are quickly adding our defrosted seafood blend. This has little shrimp, bay scallops, and squid rings. Delicious. I'm going to hit this with a little Old Bay seasoning. That's a classic seafood flavor. Don't worry if your camera lens fogs up and things get a little blurry. It's going to be fine. As soon as these get a little pink to them, I'm taking them off the heat and over to the oven where our pizza is baking away. Very carefully, that pizza stone is crazy hot. I'm going to add the half-cooked seafood blend to our pizza, and back in it goes for only just about 3 more minutes. Why do we do it this way? Well, because overcooked seafood is terrible. If I put seafood blend on first and cook the whole thing for 10 to 12 minutes like the others, it would be like having a pizza piled high with rubber erasers, instead of these perfectly tender, lightly al dente mollusks and crustaceans. They would be way overcooked. So whether you use a seafood blend or maybe just shrimp or mussels or something, keep in mind that your tender, delicate seafood will turn out best if you add it toward the end. This is why we do it. this moment right here. Let's add our finishes. All 3 of these will benefit from an additional sprinkle of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, and some red pepper flakes I think will be a good counterpoint to the sweetness of the chicken sausage and to the lemony tang of the seafood pizza. I'll sprinkle some dried oregano on the supreme pizza, and I really like fresh tomatoes added to almost any pizza. I think they will go especially well on the chicken sausage. The seafood pizza needs a squeeze of lemon, and a drizzle of olive oil will make all of these taste fuller and richer. Not to mention, olive oil is a fantastically healthy fat. Now how about our fresh herbs? Some basil leaves to go with the fresh mozzarella and tomato on our chicken sausage pizza, and some freshly torn parsley on our other 2 pizzas. And I love some pepperoncini for the supreme pizza. I love the tanginess and the mild spice here. I hope that if you've been harboring any reservations about whether or not you think you could stick to a keto-compliant or other low-carb diet regime, that this pizza will illustrate, in no uncertain terms, that you don't have to feel deprived. Sure, it takes some effort, but many of the steps required to make this can be prepped ahead of time. You can make the dough and refrigerate it. You can mix your sauce, jar it up, and refrigerate that for later. You can pre-bake your crusts ahead of time. You can even freeze pizza crusts that have been pre-baked for later. You can make ready all these ingredients on your prep day and then have fresh, homemade pizza whenever you feel like it, even during your busy week. Just remember the 7 P's of pizza making. Planning, preparation, and patience produce prompt pizza perfection. Stay with Kettle and Bones for many, many, many more momentous, magnanimous, marvelously made meals. But for now, just enjoy your crispy, thin crust pizza.